Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney has met with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa ahead of a meeting of the G7 countries in Canada. The leaders are gathering in Canadian Rockies, where the Israel-Iran conflict is expected to dominate the agenda. Let's bring in SABC News correspondent Nick Harper now, who's live from the resort. Nick, good to have you. It appears that the leaders will have a tough time when it comes to the Middle East because the situation between Iran and Israel is going from bad to worse.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems that those tensions that we've seen over the last few days, those retaliatory attacks, none of that shows any signs of slowing down. So here at the G7, it's all about trying to work on diplomatic efforts to end that conflict. But already, Donald Trump, at his very first press conference, essentially threw an enormous spanner in the works of global diplomacy by suggesting that although many things need to take place, including talks to try and broker a peace deal, and in saying that Iran needs to speak now before it's too late. But despite all of that, there are reports that Donald Trump is refusing to sign on to a draft agreement that the other G7 countries have put together, a draft statement that calls for de-escalation in the Middle East and says that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon. Now, it's unclear if Donald Trump may perhaps sign on to it later, but at this stage he seems to be holding out. So the G7 nations may be looking to the US president perhaps to use his influence with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try and get him to de-escalate. But bear in mind, the Prime Minister Netanyahu has said very recently that Israel is on a path to victory. It seems that he intends to continue with those strikes, as we've seen very recently on Tehran, including on state media.
And Nick, Israel is not short of allies within the G7 group of countries, even though some, like France, have become increasingly impatient with the Netanyahu government based on the war that it's carrying out against Palestinians in Gaza and Hamas there. And South Africa would stand out as the only country with a somewhat close relationship with Tehran. Do we get a sense then of which way that joint communique might swing, even if it calls ultimately for a de-escalation, where it would condemn one side more than the other?
Yeah, it's interesting because some of the wording that we're hearing is in that joint statement, yet to be fully signed by all of the leaders, does suggest that there should be protection of civilians on both sides, that de-escalation and maximum restraint should happen, but also saying that Israel has the right to defend itself. So therefore, perhaps coming more firmly down on the side of Israel than on Iran. It's unclear what part President Ramaphosa may play in all of these discussions. Obviously not part of the G7, so not part of this draft statement that's being put together, but of course here and having important conversations with diplomats, potentially other world leaders. He spoke to Prime Minister Mark Carney on Sunday evening. So undoubtedly South African diplomacy will be at play here, trying to move things forward, ultimately trying to broker some sort of ceasefire, some sort of deal that may de-escalate the situation and certainly stop it from spreading further around the Middle East region.
We also have the issue of trade. The Trump tariffs are controversial a few months ago. They've now been put on pause. Do we know how the rest of the G7 nations will approach any future negotiations? Because the European Union as a bloc is also present, but Trump would prefer, in fact, a one-on-one arrangement with each country.
Well, that's right. When it comes to the EU, Donald Trump has particular beef with the bloc, that 27-member bloc. Plenty of countries there represented. They negotiate as a bloc. He would like to keep tariffs in place. And bear in mind that we are hurtling towards that July 9th deadline. That's the end of the 90-day pause that Donald Trump put into effect. At the end of that 90-day pause, tariffs will ratchet up against the EU, but against South Africa, against all of the nations around the world. We do know that the EU Commission representative, who's in charge of negotiations, is here. He will be meeting with the US Trade Representative Jameson Greer. They will try to move things forward to negotiate a trade agreement. And ultimately, many other nations are here trying to move forward their individual trade agreements with the United States, trying to do a deal in the few remaining weeks that we have before that July 9th deadline. But of course, Donald Trump, perhaps in some respects, is on the back foot going into this because there is animosity on many sides from the other nations who are here, feeling that Donald Trump has disrupted the global economy by putting this trade war into effect.
Very quickly, Nick, we're out of time, but South Africa itself will want to have, I wonder if they'll be able to, President Ramaphosa and his delegation, have a conversation with Trump, because they went to the White House to try and smooth out the relationship. So firstly, has there been a genuine thaw in relations between Washington and Pretoria, and are conditions, secondly, favourable for South Africa to negotiate a deal on trade and tariffs that works?
Well, I think it'll be very difficult for South Africa to negotiate that deal because there does not appear to have been an improvement in relations since that Oval Office meeting between President Ramaphosa and President Trump. They will try and move things forward, but I think it still looks very difficult to try and achieve the things that South Africa wants to achieve when Donald Trump's administration seems so firmly opposed to Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. Harper live for us in Canada watching the G7 gathering.